He did this, and his life changed forever. He was always just an ordinary Hollywood director. His days passed by quietly filming scenes and reviewing scripts. Nothing hinted at trouble. But one day, something happened that turned everything upside down. At first, it seemed like a coincidence. Just a simple research trip to Amish country for his next film. But then things started to get even stranger. Seconds felt like an eternity. His heart was pounding. And then, at that very moment, when it seemed like there was no turning back, a 90-year-old Amish woman began reciting a poem that would shake him to his core. But the most unbelievable part happened after that. It was so incredible that if someone had told him before, he never would have believed it. Her words would lead him on a journey that would transform not just his film, but his entire understanding of love, loss, and the power of memory. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In the heart of Lancaster County, where time seems to move at its own gentle pace, a simple stone beneath an ancient willow tree stands as a testament to a love story that transcends generations. What makes a celebrated Hollywood actor venture into the quiet embrace of Amish country, seeking to honor a romance he never witnessed firsthand? The answer lies in the delicate threads of fate that brought Anthony Hopkins to this precise moment, kneeling in the soft earth beneath swaying willow branches. The stone's smooth surface bears a carefully carved inscription, each letter etched with the precision of someone who understands the weight of remembrance. Anthony's fingers trace the words, feeling the connection to Anna Zook's poetry that first drew him to this peaceful corner of Pennsylvania. The verses that captured Daniel Miller's sacrifice during World War II and Anna's undying devotion had touched something profound in the actor's soul, compelling him to bridge the gap between his world and theirs. Eli Zook watches from a respectful distance, his young face reflecting both curiosity and understanding. As Anna's great-nephew, he has grown up with her stories, but seeing this renowned Englishman honor his great-aunt's love story stirs something unexpected in his heart. The secret admiration he holds for modern storytelling helps him appreciate the significance of this moment, how some tales deserve to be preserved in more ways than one. Ruth Zook stands at the farmhouse window, her initial misgivings about Anthony Hopkins's presence in their community softening as she observes his reverent gesture. Her role as Anna's caretaker has made her protective, perhaps overly so. But there's something in the actor's demeanor that speaks to genuine respect, rather than mere curiosity. The way he handles the memorial stone reminds her of how carefully she tends to Anna's needs. With gentle determination and deep regard, Anna herself sits in her favorite rocking chair, her aged hands folded over a worn journal containing the poetry that brought Anthony Hopkins into their lives. Through her words, Daniel Miller's spirit lives on, touching hearts across boundaries she never imagined crossing. The connection she shares with Anthony surprises her. How could this man from such a different world understand so completely the depth of her first and only love? The willow's branches whisper overhead, carrying memories of young Anna and Daniel's stolen moments beneath its protective canopy. Their love story, interrupted by war and preserved through poetry, has created an unexpected bridge between two worlds. Anthony's presence here, placing this memorial stone, represents more than a simple tribute. It's a recognition that some loves transcend time, culture, and even death itself. Through Eli's quiet support and occasional translation, Anthony has navigated the delicate balance between respect for Amish traditions and his desire to honor Anna's story. His journey from first reading her poetry to this moment has transformed him in ways he's still discovering. The simple act of placing this stone carries the weight of promises kept and stories remembered. Ruth's gradual acceptance of Anthony's presence mirrors the community's shifting perspective. Initially viewed with suspicion, his genuine reverence for their ways and his deep understanding of Anna's loss have earned him a unique position of trust. The stone he places isn't just for Anna and Daniel. It's a bridge between past and present, between English and Amish worlds. The inscription on the stone speaks of love's endurance, carefully worded to honor both Amish simplicity and the depth of feeling in Anna's poetry. It stands as a testament to Daniel Miller, whose sacrifice echoes through decades, touching lives he never knew he would influence. Through Anna's words, his memory has shaped not just her life, but now reaches across time to touch others seeking understanding of true devotion. As Anthony steps back from the stone, the late afternoon sun catches the polished surface, creating a gentle glow that seems to mirror the light in Anna's eyes whenever she speaks of Daniel. What began as a simple desire to honor a poet's love has blossomed into something more profound, a reminder that genuine connections can form in the most unexpected places, between the most unlikely people, when hearts remain open to love's endless possibilities. The late summer heat shimmered across Lancaster County's patchwork fields as Anthony Hopkins' rental car wound through the narrow country roads. Having left the predictable chaos of Los Angeles behind, he found himself questioning whether this detour would yield anything worthwhile for his upcoming film project. The studio executives had pushed for more authentic locations, leading him to this quiet corner of Pennsylvania where time seemed to move at its own deliberate pace. Through his open window, the clip-clop of horse hooves announced the approach of an Amish buggy. A young man held the reins, his straw hat tilted against the sun. Their eyes met briefly as they passed, and Anthony noticed something unexpected in the youth's gaze, a flash of recognition. Not of Anthony personally, but of something broader, something that spoke of a world beyond these fields. The young man was Eli Zook, though Anthony wouldn't learn his name until later that afternoon. Their paths would cross again at Miller's general store, where Anthony stopped to ask directions to the local bed and breakfast. Eli stood behind the counter, having just finished delivering fresh produce from his family's farm. The same curiosity lingered in his eyes. "You're not here for the usual tourist spots," Eli observed, his statement more declaration than question. His English was perfect, but carried the subtle lilt common to the Pennsylvania Dutch. When Anthony explained his mission to scout filming locations, something in Eli's demeanor shifted subtly. "There are stories here," Eli offered, "deeper than what most outsiders see." He hesitated, glancing around the store before continuing. "My great-aunt Anna, she has lived such a story, though it's not mine to tell." The mention of Anna sparked Anthony's professional interest, but Eli's obvious reverence for this unknown woman stirred something more personal. Before he could probe further, the store's bell chimed as Ruth Zook entered, her stern presence immediately commanding attention. She cast a sharp look between her nephew and the English stranger, her disapproval evident in the tight set of her mouth. "Eli," she said firmly in Pennsylvania Dutch, though her eyes remained fixed on Anthony, "the deliveries need finishing." Anthony watched the silent communication between aunt and nephew, sensing the complex dynamics at play. Ruth's protective stance suggested more than simple wariness of outsiders. She was guarding something or someone, perhaps this mysterious Anna that Eli had mentioned. The interaction might have ended there, following the usual pattern of polite but firm separation between the English and Amish worlds. But as Anthony turned to leave, Eli spoke up again, this time in English for Anthony's benefit. "Aunt Ruth, he's looking for stories about our community. Real stories, not the kind they usually tell about us." Eli's words carried weight beyond their simple meaning, touching on something that made Ruth's expression flicker. Ruth studied Anthony with new consideration, her initial hostility softening almost imperceptibly. "Stories," she repeated slowly. "And what would you do with our stories, Mr. Hopkins?" Anthony supplied. "Anthony Hopkins. I'm a filmmaker, but more importantly, I'm someone who believes that true stories deserve to be told with respect and understanding." Ruth's response was interrupted by the arrival of several tourists, their casual chatter breaking the moment's tension. As Anthony prepared to leave, Eli quickly scribbled something on a scrap of paper and passed it across the counter. An address, and beneath it, 4 simple words: "The Willow Faces East." This cryptic message would later prove to be Anthony's entry point into a world far more complex than the simple pastoral scene he'd driven through earlier. But at that moment, standing in the warm afternoon light of the general store, he couldn't have known how these few minutes would alter the course of not just his film, but his understanding of love, loss, and the stories we choose to preserve. What he did know, watching Ruth's careful movements as she helped the tourists and Eli's thoughtful glances in his direction, was that he had stumbled upon something far more compelling than any manufactured Hollywood drama. The question remained, would they trust him enough to share it? The late summer sun cast long shadows across Lancaster County's patchwork fields as Anthony Hopkins' rental car crawled along the narrow country road. His GPS had failed 20 minutes ago, leaving him to navigate by the hand-drawn map Eli Zook had faxed to his office. The young Amish man's precise penmanship marked the way past specific landmarks: a lightning-struck oak, 3 silos standing in a row, and a covered bridge that had seen better days. Anthony's initial skepticism about this project had begun to fade during the 3-hour drive from New York. There was something compelling about the landscape that seemed to whisper stories of its own. The acclaimed director found himself wondering what tales these ancient farmhouses could tell, what secrets lay behind their weathered walls and unwavering traditions. A figure in traditional Amish clothing appeared ahead, waving from beside a wooden fence. As Anthony pulled over, Eli Zook's warm smile and bright eyes immediately put him at ease. Despite the cultural divide between them, Eli carried himself with an unexpected worldliness that belied his traditional appearance. "Welcome to Lancaster County, Mr. Hopkins," Eli said, extending his hand. "I trust the journey wasn't too difficult?" His perfect English and subtle hint of humor surprised Anthony, who had anticipated a more reserved greeting. "Please call me Anthony," he replied, shaking Eli's hand. "And the journey was educational. Your map saved me when technology failed." The younger man's eyes lit up at the mention of technology, though he quickly masked his interest. As they walked toward the main farmhouse, Eli explained the complex web of relationships that defined their community. He spoke of his great-aunt Anna with particular reverence, describing her as a keeper of memories and stories that stretched back to World War II. Anthony noticed how Eli's tone shifted when mentioning Anna's poetry. There was something there, something deeper than mere family pride. "Aunt Ruth will be cautious at first," Eli warned as they approached the house. "She's protective of Anna, especially when it comes to outsiders asking about the past." The young man paused, choosing his words carefully. "There are some wounds that never fully heal, Mr. Hopkins, Anthony. My great-aunt's story is tied to one such wound." The mention of these hidden depths piqued Anthony's curiosity. What had drawn him to this project initially had been the universal themes of love and loss, but now he sensed there was more to uncover. The story of Anna Zook and her lost love during World War II wasn't just another tale of star-crossed lovers. It was something far more profound. Eli led Anthony through the immaculately kept garden, pointing out the herbs and flowers that Anna still tended despite her advanced age. "She says every plant has its own poetry," Eli explained. "The way they grow, bloom, and return to the earth, it's all part of a greater story." Before they could reach the house, a stern-faced woman emerged onto the porch. Ruth Zook's expression was a study in contained disapproval as she watched their approach. Her hands, calloused from years of hard work, gripped her apron with barely concealed tension. "Aunt Ruth," Eli called out, his voice carrying a gentle authority that surprised Anthony. "This is Anthony Hopkins, the director I told you about. He's here to learn about our ways, about Anna's story." Ruth's reply was measured, her words carefully chosen. "The English have their ways of telling stories, and we have ours. Some things are better left in God's hands." Yet despite her evident resistance, she stepped aside to let them enter, her gesture a reluctant acknowledgement of the permission already granted by the community elders. As Anthony crossed the threshold into the Zook home, he felt the weight of history and tradition pressing in around him. The simple furnishings, the absence of modern conveniences, the quiet tick of an ancient clock. Everything spoke of a life lived deliberately, thoughtfully, in accordance with deeply held beliefs. But it was the sound of soft humming from somewhere, deeper in the house, that caught his attention. The melody, haunting and familiar, seemed to float through the air like a memory seeking recognition. Anthony found himself straining to identify it, Certain he'd heard it before in some distant past. Eli noticed his interest and smiled knowingly. "That's Anna," he said quietly. "She's probably working on her latest poem. She says the old songs help her remember." The young man's expression grew thoughtful. "Sometimes I think she's not just remembering her own past, but keeping alive the memory of someone who never had the chance to grow old." The humming grew clearer as they moved through the house, and with it came the first inklings of understanding. Anthony realized that the story he had come to tell was far more complex than he had imagined. What had begun as a simple tale of love and loss was revealing itself to be something far more profound, a testament to the power of memory, the persistence of love, and the unexpected ways in which the past reaches forward to touch the present. Through the spotless window panes of the Zook farmhouse, Anthony Hopkins caught his first glimpse of Anna Zook. The elderly woman sat in a handcrafted rocking chair, her weathered fingers moving methodically across a piece of knitting work as autumn sunlight filtered through the glass. There was something magnetic about her stillness, a quiet dignity that drew his attention away from Eli's enthusiastic commentary about the farm's history. The renowned actor found himself studying her profile, noting how she seemed both present and somehow distant, as if inhabiting two worlds simultaneously. Her silver hair was neatly tucked beneath a traditional prayer covering, and her plain dress spoke of the simplicity that defined Amish life. Yet there was nothing simple about the depth of concentration evident in her expression as she worked. "That's my great-aunt Anna," Eli explained softly, following Anthony's gaze. "She's been living with us since before I was born." There was a gentle reverence in the young man's voice that suggested more than mere familial duty. Anthony detected notes of genuine affection and perhaps a hint of protective concern. Through the window, Anna's hands suddenly stilled. Without turning her head, she seemed to sense their presence, her fingers hovering over the yarn as if frozen in time. What thoughts occupied her mind in these quiet moments? What stories lay behind those eyes that now gazed unseeing at the familiar landscape beyond her window? Eli shifted uncomfortably beside Anthony, his earlier enthusiasm tempered by something unspoken. "She doesn't talk much these days," he offered, his voice barely above a whisper. "But her silence speaks volumes, especially to those who know her story." Anthony's curiosity deepened as he observed the subtle interaction between aunt and great-nephew. Even without words, there was a palpable connection, an understanding that transcended the generational gap between them. He found himself wondering about the poetry Eli had mentioned earlier. What verses lay hidden in the heart of this quiet woman? Ruth Zook appeared in the doorway then, her presence drawing Anthony's attention away from Anna. The older woman's expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes held a warning that needed no translation. This was more than just protective instinct. There was history here, perhaps even pain, that made Ruth wary of outside interest in her sister-in-law. "She's been working on that same piece for weeks now," Ruth remarked, her tone deliberately casual. "Some days she knits for hours, others she just holds the needles and watches the world go by." The unspoken message was clear. Anna's world was private, not meant for public consumption or artistic interpretation. Anthony recognized the delicate balance he would need to maintain. His presence here wasn't just about creating art. It was about earning trust and understanding the complex web of relationships that bound these people together. Each person in this household played a role in protecting Anna. From what, he wasn't yet sure. The scene before him carried echoes of countless stories he'd encountered throughout his career. Yet this felt different. There was an authenticity here that no script could capture. A real-life drama unfolding in quiet moments and meaningful glances. What secrets lay buried beneath the surface of this seemingly simple Amish household? As if in answer to his unspoken question, Anna's fingers resumed their steady rhythm with the knitting needles. The soft click-click-click seemed to mark time in a way that transcended the mere passing of minutes. Was she counting stitches, or perhaps measuring out memories with each movement? What stories were woven into the fabric taking shape beneath her skilled hands? Eli touched Anthony's arm lightly, gesturing toward the barn where the tour was supposed to continue. But as they moved away from the window, Anthony found his thoughts lingering on the solitary figure in the rocking chair. Something told him that understanding Anna Zook would be crucial to understanding the story he had come here to tell. If only he could find a way past the protective barriers her family had erected around her. As twilight settled over the Lancaster farmhouse, Anthony Hopkins found himself seated at the Zook's well-worn oak table, the unfamiliar silence broken only by the gentle clink of silverware against plates, the absence of modern dinner table, distractions, no phones buzzing, no television humming in the background, created an almost sacred atmosphere that both unnerved and intrigued him. Ruth Zook moved with practiced efficiency, serving generous portions of chicken pot pie and fresh-baked bread. Her movements were precise, yet Anthony noticed how her eyes frequently darted to Anna, who sat quietly at the far end of the table. The great-aunt's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass, and Ruth immediately stepped forward to steady it. This small gesture revealed volumes about their relationship, both the care and the control Ruth exercised over her charge. Eli, seated across from Anthony, maintained a careful balance between Amish propriety and barely concealed curiosity. Between bites, he would glance at Anthony with questions clearly forming behind his eyes, though tradition and respect kept them unspoken. The young man's internal struggle reminded Anthony of his own childhood, when imagination and duty often waged silent wars within him. The meal progressed with sparse conversation, primarily consisting of practical matters about the farm and community. However, when Anna quietly mentioned Daniel's name while passing the butter, a subtle tension descended upon the table. Ruth's shoulders stiffened, Eli's eyes dropped to his plate, and Anthony found himself wondering about the weight this unseen presence held over the household. Anna's voice, though soft, carried an undercurrent of determination as she spoke about Daniel's favorite evening meals. "He always said grace lasted longer when there was chicken pot pie on the table," she remarked, a ghost of a smile playing across her features. Ruth's hands tightened around her serving spoon, but she remained silent, leaving Anthony to wonder about the complex dynamics surrounding Daniel's memory. The filmmaker observed how Anna's words seemed to transport her to another time, her eyes taking on a distant quality that transformed her entire countenance. In these moments she appeared younger, more vibrant, as if Daniel's memory acted as a bridge between past and present. Anthony recognized this as the same energy he had sensed in her poetry, a passionate undercurrent beneath the calm surface. Eli, perhaps sensing the growing tension, steered the conversation toward safer territory, asking about the weather forecast for the coming harvest. Yet Anthony noticed how the young man's eyes lingered on his great-aunt, with a mixture of concern and protection. This subtle interaction suggested that Eli served as more than just a bridge between the English and Amish worlds. He was also a mediator within his own family. As Ruth cleared the dishes, her movements precise and perhaps a bit more forceful than necessary, Anthony caught glimpses of an unspoken narrative. How long had she served as gatekeeper to Anna's memories? What prompted her protective stance? And what did she fear from this English stranger's presence in their carefully ordered world? The evening light filtering through the windows cast long shadows across the kitchen floor, creating an interplay of light and dark that seemed to mirror the complexity of relationships unfolding before Anthony. He found himself drawn deeper into the mystery of Anna's story, recognizing that each person at this table held a piece of the puzzle he sought to understand. This simple evening meal had revealed layers of family dynamics that no amount of research could have uncovered. The way Anna's poetry spoke of love and loss suddenly felt more tangible, grounded in the reality of these relationships and the echoes of Daniel's memory that still reverberated through their lives. As the meal drew to a close, Anthony realized that his role as documentarian had shifted. He was no longer merely an observer, but had become entangled in the delicate web of relationships that surrounded Anna's story. How would his presence continue to affect these carefully maintained boundaries? What other revelations lay hidden beneath the surface of this seemingly simple Amish household? The questions multiplied as Anthony helped clear the table, each interaction adding new dimensions to his understanding. He had come seeking a story about Amish poetry, but found himself immersed in a narrative far more complex, one that challenged his preconceptions about love, memory, and the invisible bonds that hold families together across time. The evening shadows lengthened across the Zook farmhouse as the dinner dishes clinked softly in the sink. Ruth Zook's practiced hands moved methodically through the washing routine, but her mind churned with unspoken worries. Through the kitchen window, she observed Anthony Hopkins and Eli walking toward the barn, their figures silhouetted against the setting sun. Their easy companionship stirred an uncomfortable feeling in her chest. That Englisher asks too many questions, Ruth murmured, more to herself than to Anna, who sat quietly at the kitchen table, her weathered hands folded over one of her notebooks. The older woman's silence only amplified Ruth's growing disquiet. When Eli returned from showing Anthony to the guest house, Ruth beckoned him into the kitchen. "A word, please." Her tone carried the weight of authority that came from years of managing the household. Eli's shoulders tensed slightly, recognizing the familiar cadence of his aunt's concern. "Why did you bring him here, Eli?" Ruth's voice remained low, mindful of Anna in the adjacent room. "You know how fragile your great-aunt's health has been. These memories he wants to stir up, they're better left in the past where they belong." Eli shifted his weight, his hands deep in his pockets. The simple gesture reminded Ruth of when he was a boy, trying to explain why he'd been reading those English books instead of tending to his chores. "Aunt Ruth, Mr. Hopkins isn't here to cause trouble. He's a storyteller, yes, but he understands respect and boundaries." "Does he?" Ruth's hands gripped the edge of the sink. "I saw how he watched Anna during dinner, like she was some kind of mystery to solve. We're not characters in one of his fancy Hollywood tales, Eli. We're real people with real hearts that can break." The young man's eyes drifted to where Anna sat in her familiar chair, her presence a gentle reminder of all they sought to protect. Perhaps that's exactly why he needs to be here. Anna's story, Daniel's story, they deserve to be remembered properly. Ruth's expression softened slightly at the mention of Daniel Miller. Even after all these years, his name carried weight. In their household, like a ghost that never quite departed. Your great-aunt has carried that burden long enough. Those poems she writes, the ones she thinks we don't know about, they're her way of keeping Daniel close. What good can come from sharing that private pain with the world? Maybe it's not about sharing pain, Eli ventured carefully. Maybe it's about sharing hope, love, the kind that survives even when everything else falls away. He paused, choosing his next words with deliberation. Isn't that what our faith teaches us? Ruth turned back to the dishes, but her movements had lost their earlier precision. Faith also teaches us to be wise about who we trust, Eli. This man, he comes from a world that's always trying to turn our way of life into something it's not. Simple folk living simple lives. That's what they see. They don't understand the depth of what we hold dear. Anthony's different, Eli insisted, his voice carrying a conviction that made Ruth look up sharply. He sees beyond the surface. When he read Anna's poetry, something changed in him. I watched it happen. That's what concerns me most, Ruth admitted, finally voicing her deepest fear. What if he sees too much? What if he uncovers things that were meant to stay buried with Daniel? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to explore. From the other room, they heard Anna humming softly, an old hymn that seemed to bridge the gap between past and present, between what was lost and what remained. Eli stepped closer to his aunt, his voice gentle but firm. We can't protect her from her own heart, Aunt Ruth. Maybe it's time to trust that sharing these stories might bring healing, not just pain. Ruth's hands stilled in the soapy water. The evening light caught the silver threads in her hair, reminding Eli of how many years she'd spent as Anna's guardian, not just of her physical needs but of her memories as well. What right did any of them have to challenge that devoted vigilance? Yet as they stood there in the gathering dusk, the sound of Anna's humming drifted through the house like a thread connecting them all. Ruth with her protective love, Eli with his bridge between worlds, and somewhere out in the guest house, Anthony Hopkins with his burning desire to understand a love story that had survived war, loss, and the passage of time itself. Who would tell these stories if they all remained silent? And more importantly, what would be lost in that silence? The early morning mist clung to the Zook farmland as Anthony Hopkins traced the worn paths between the fields, his leather shoes collecting dew from the tall grass. After the tension with Ruth the previous day, he felt an inexplicable pull to understand this place that had shaped Anna's poetry and held decades of unspoken stories. The simplicity of the landscape stood in stark contrast to his usual world of bright lights and cameras. Here, each fence post seemed to tell a story, weathered by seasons of sun and rain. Anthony found himself wondering how many times Daniel Miller had walked these same paths, perhaps dreaming of a future with Anna, before war called him away. The thought created an unexpected ache in his chest. Eli appeared at the edge of the cornfield, his presence as natural as the landscape itself. "English visitors usually find our morning walks strange," he said, falling into step beside Anthony. "But there's something about the land that speaks, isn't there?" His question carried a knowing tone that suggested he understood Anthony's need for solitude. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Their conversation meandered like the path they followed, touching on the history of the farm and the families who had worked it for generations. Eli shared stories of his childhood, running through these fields with his cousins while Anna watched from the porch, always with her notebook in hand. The young man's words painted a picture of a community bound together by more than just tradition, by an understanding of life's rhythm that seemed foreign to the outside world. Anthony found himself opening up about his own journey, the roles he'd played, the stories he'd told through film. To his surprise, Eli's eyes lit up with careful interest, revealing a hidden appreciation for storytelling that transcended his Amish upbringing. Their discussion turned to the power of narrative, how some tales demanded to be told regardless of the medium. The morning light strengthened as they approached the eastern field, where a small cemetery stood as a silent reminder of those who had come before. Eli hesitated before speaking. Daniel would have been buried here had they found him. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what could have been. Anthony noticed how Eli's gaze drifted to a particular empty spot, as if the community had unconsciously preserved a space for their lost son. Ruth's figure appeared in the distance, her dark dress a stark silhouette against the golden wheat. She paused in her work, watching the two men with an expression Anthony couldn't quite read. Was there a softening in her stance, or did she still see him as an intruder in their carefully ordered world? The morning's exploration had shifted something in Anthony's understanding. The land wasn't just soil and crops. It was the foundation of a story that had shaped every person who called it home. Anna's poetry suddenly felt more immediate, more vital. How many verses had been born from these very paths, these fields, this light? Eli shared his aunt's morning routine, how she still insisted on watching the sunrise from her porch, weather permitting. "She says the morning light helps her remember," he explained, his voice gentle with understanding. "Sometimes I think she's not just remembering Daniel, but everything this place has witnessed." Their circuit brought them back toward the farmhouse, where the day's activities were now in full swing. The rhythmic sound of Ruth's butter churn floated across the yard, mixing with the distant bleating of sheep and the subtle rustle of cornstalks in the breeze. Anthony found himself slowing his pace, reluctant to break the spell of the morning. The walk had revealed more than just the physical landscape. It had opened a window into the soul of the community that had shaped Anna's life and art. Each step seemed to bring Anthony closer to understanding the depth of her words, the layers of meaning in her carefully crafted verses. How much of Daniel's spirit still walked these paths? How deeply was his memory woven into the fabric of this place? As they approached the house, Anthony caught sight of Anna at her window, her face turned toward the morning light. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment he understood that the land had done more than inspire her poetry. It had preserved her heart story, waiting for someone to help her tell it to the world. The autumn wind carried whispers of untold stories across the Lancaster County farmland as Eli Zook and Anthony Hopkins walked along the weathered fence line. Their boots crunched against fallen leaves, creating a natural rhythm that seemed to match the beating of their hearts. The moment felt right for truths long held in silence. "There's something you should understand about Aunt Anna," Eli began, his voice carrying the weight of family history. "Her poetry isn't just about words on paper. It's about a love that never had the chance to bloom fully." Anthony listened intently, his years of studying human emotion through film making him particularly attuned to the significance in Eli's tone. The young Amish man's usual cheerful demeanor had given way to something more solemn, more reverent. Daniel Miller was his name, Eli continued, pausing to lean against the fence post. They were to be married in the spring of 1943. He wasn't Amish, something that caused quite a stir in the community at the time, but their love was pure and true. Aunt Anna always said he had eyes that could see into tomorrow. The revelation of Daniel's non-Amish background stirred something in Anthony. How many layers of complexity had this simple farmhouse been hiding? The story of forbidden love across cultural boundaries resonated deeply with his own experiences of crossing divides to connect with the Zook family. Daniel was drafted into the war, Eli explained, his voice growing quieter. He promised Anna he would return, that they would build a life together that somehow bridged their two worlds. She would write him poetry and he would send back letters speaking of a future filled with hope. Anthony found himself holding his breath, though he could guess the tragic ending that must follow. What happened to him? His unit was caught in the Battle of the Bulge. The letter came just after Christmas. Eli's words hung in the crisp air. "Aunt Anna wore black for a year, which wasn't our way, but even the elders understood. She never married, never looked at another man. Instead, she poured everything into her poetry." The pieces began falling into place in Anthony's mind. The depth of emotion in Anna's verses, the protective nature of Ruth, the way the entire family seemed to guard Anna's privacy with such fierce dedication. Her poetry wasn't just art, it was a memorial, a living testament to a love cut short by war. "The poems you've been reading," Eli continued, "they're all for him. Every single one. She spent decades crafting words to keep his memory alive, to explore what might have been. That's why they're so powerful," Anthony finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. "They're not just poems. They're conversations with Daniel." Eli nodded, a sad smile crossing his face. "That's why Ruth was so hesitant about your presence here. These aren't just family stories, they're sacred memories, but something about you. Aunt Anna sees something in you that reminds her of Daniel. Perhaps it's your ability to listen, truly listen to what lies beneath the words." The revelation cast everything in a new light. Anna's initial openness to him, Ruth's protective stance, the way the poetry seemed to pulse with living emotion rather than mere remembrance. Anthony found himself wondering about Daniel Miller, this man whose love had inspired decades of verse, whose memory had shaped the lives of everyone around him. "Does she ever speak of him directly?" Anthony asked, curious about how such a profound loss was handled in their community. "Rarely," Eli replied, adjusting his hat against the wind. "But his presence is felt in everything, the way she tends her garden, the songs she hums while working, even how she watches the sunset. It's as if she's still sharing these moments with him, even after all these years." The conversation shifted something fundamental in Anthony's understanding of his project. What had begun as a documentary about Amish poetry had evolved into something far more universal, a story about love's ability to transcend time, culture, and even death itself. But with this knowledge came responsibility, a deeper obligation, to handle Anna's story with the reverence it deserved. "Thank you for sharing this with me," Anthony said finally, understanding the trust Eli had placed in him. "I promise to honor their story." Eli's expression softened, relief evident in his features. "I knew you would understand. That's why I felt it was time you knew. The story of Daniel and Anna isn't just about loss. It's about how love can transform grief into something beautiful, something that continues to touch lives decades later." Anthony Hopkins sat in the dimness of his temporary lodging, turning the weathered leather journal over in his hands. The book, entrusted to him by Eli earlier that evening, carried the weight of decades within its pages. Each carefully preserved sheet contained Anna Zook's hidden thoughts, a testament to a love story that never reached its intended conclusion. The first poem, dated 1943, bore witness to Anna's initial encounter with Daniel Miller. The careful penmanship spoke of youth and promise, describing stolen glances across a harvest gathering and the flutter of first love beneath autumn skies. Anthony found himself transported to that moment, seeing through Anna's eyes as she captured the essence of a young man who would forever alter her path. As he progressed through the journal, the evolution of Anna's writing style revealed itself. Early verses sparkled with hope and possibility, but the tone shifted dramatically after Daniel's departure for war service. Her words became more intricate, weaving together both English and Pennsylvania Dutch phrases in a unique tapestry of expression. The linguistic complexity reflected the growing sophistication of her emotions, even as she remained bound by the simplicity of Amish life. Ruth's role in preserving these writings became clearer with each page. Margin notes in a different hand, clearly Ruth's, documented dates and contexts, creating an unofficial archive of Anna's emotional journey. Despite her initial resistance to Anthony's presence in their lives, Ruth had served as the silent guardian of her sister-in-law's literary legacy. The poetry itself defied the common perception of Amish creative expression. While rooted in the natural world and spiritual reflection, Anna's verses ventured into territory that challenged traditional boundaries. She wrote of radio signals carrying news across oceans, of mechanical birds carrying soldiers to distant shores, and of the strange new world that had claimed Daniel's life. Each poem pushed against the constraints of her isolated existence while remaining deeply anchored in her faith. Eli's earlier revelations about his great-aunt took on new meaning as Anthony discovered poems that seemed to predict her nephew's secret fascination with storytelling. Lines about the power of tales to bridge worlds and connect hearts appeared throughout the collection, suggesting that Anna had recognized a kindred spirit in young Eli long before he understood it himself. Most powerful entries centered around the days following the news of Daniel's death. Rather than traditional elegies, these poems explored the concept of memory as a living force. Anna wrote of Daniel's presence in the wind that stirred wheat fields, in the call of whippoorwills at dusk, and in the quiet moments before dawn when the world held its breath. Her grief transformed into a celebration of how love transcends the physical realm. Anthony found himself particularly moved by a series of poems written during the years when Ruth first came to live with them. The verses captured the gradual transition from reluctant caretaker to beloved family member, highlighting how shared sorrow could forge unexpected bonds. Through Anna's eyes, Ruth's initial stern exterior melted away to reveal a woman of profound compassion and unwavering loyalty. As midnight approached, Anthony discovered the most recent entries. These poems, written in a shakier hand but with undiminished spirit, spoke directly to future readers. Anna seemed to have known that someday her words would find their way into the world. She wrote of hoping that her experience might help others understand how love, loss, and faith could coexist without diminishing each other. The final poem in the journal, dated just months earlier, addressed the changing world beyond the Amish community's boundaries. It acknowledged the arrival of new stories and storytellers while asserting the enduring value of traditional ways. The verses suggested that truth could wear many faces and speak through many voices, a sentiment that seemed to give blessing to both Eli's secret passions and Anthony's presence in their lives. Reading. Anna's lifetime of poetry revealed the true purpose of Anthony's journey to this community. He wasn't merely collecting stories. He was participating in the continuation of a narrative that had begun long before his arrival. The journal represented more than a collection of personal reflections. It was a bridge between worlds, much like Anna herself had become. What would sharing these poems mean for the Amish community? How would Anna's words, finally released from their leather-bound sanctuary, reshape the relationships between all those who had played a part in preserving them? As Anthony closed the journal, these questions lingered in the air like the last notes of a hymn in an empty church. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the Zook farmhouse as Anthony Hopkins stood in Ruth's meticulously kept kitchen, his fingers nervously tracing the spine of Anna's poetry journal. After discovering the depth of Anna's literary talent and her decades-long dedication to preserving Daniel Miller's memory through verse, he felt an overwhelming need to speak with her alone. But in the close-knit Amish community, such a request required careful consideration of cultural sensitivities and established protocols. Eli Zook noticed Anthony's contemplative state and approached him with quiet understanding. "The words have touched you deeply, haven't they?" he asked, his voice carrying the wisdom that seemed beyond his years. Anthony nodded, unable to immediately find the right words to express the profound impact of Anna's poetry. Ruth Zook observed their interaction from across the room, her initial suspicion of the English filmmaker having gradually softened over the past weeks. She continued kneading dough for the evening's bread, but her attention remained fixed on the unfolding conversation. The flour-dusted kitchen counter served as her vantage point for protecting her family's interests, particularly those of her beloved aunt-in-law. "I need to speak with Anna," Anthony finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something about her poetry, about the way she's captured Daniel's essence through the years. It's more than just verses on paper. It's a testament to enduring love and memory." Eli glanced at his Aunt Ruth, recognizing the weight of this moment. In their world, private conversations between unmarried men and women, especially involving outsiders, were carefully regulated. Yet there was something in Anthony's demeanor that spoke of genuine respect and understanding. Ruth wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward. "What exactly do you wish to discuss with her?" The question carried no accusation, only careful consideration. Her role as Anna's primary caretaker demanded such vigilance, even as her heart had begun to recognize Anthony's sincere intentions. Anthony carefully placed the journal on the kitchen table, his filmmaker's instincts giving way to something more personal. "These poems reveal a story that deserves to be honored properly. But more than that, they've shown me a perspective on love and dedication that I've never encountered before. I believe Anna might have insights that could help me understand not just Daniel's story, but the very nature of devotion itself." The kitchen fell silent save for the gentle ticking of the wall clock and the distant sound of horses in the field. Eli moved to stand beside his aunt, his presence offering silent support for Anthony's request. The young man's secret appreciation for modern storytelling had given him a unique understanding of why this conversation mattered. Ruth's hands, usually so sure in their movements, fidgeted with her apron strings. "Anna has never spoken of these poems to anyone outside the family," she said softly. "Not even to most of us. Why do you think she would share such private thoughts with you?" Anthony considered this question carefully, aware that his answer would likely determine whether he would be granted this privilege. "Because sometimes it takes a stranger to help us see our own story more clearly. Anna's poetry isn't just about preserving Daniel's memory. It's about the universal human experience of love, loss, and faith." Eli stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "I believe Anthony is right, Aunt Ruth. Perhaps this is why God has brought him to us. Anna's story, and through her, Daniel's story, might have a purpose beyond our understanding." Ruth looked between the two men, her protective instincts wrestling with the undeniable truth in their words. The kitchen's familiar warmth seemed to embrace them all as she contemplated her decision. Years of caring for Anna had taught her to read the subtle signs of her aunt-in-law's needs, and lately she had noticed a new light in Anna's eyes when Anthony was present. "There are conditions," Ruth finally said, her voice carrying both authority and compassion. "The conversation must take place here in the kitchen where I can be nearby, and you must promise to respect any boundaries Anna sets, including her right to end the conversation at any time." Anthony nodded solemnly, understanding the trust being extended to him. "Of course. I wouldn't want it any other way." Eli smiled, slightly, recognizing this moment as another small bridge being built between their two worlds. "Shall I go fetch Aunt Anna now?" he asked, looking between Ruth and Anthony for confirmation. The question hung in the air, weighted with possibility. Would Anna be willing to share her most intimate thoughts with this English stranger? And if she did, What new understanding might emerge from this unlikely connection between an Amish poet and a modern filmmaker? The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through Anna Zook's bedroom window, as Anthony Hopkins settled into the wooden chair beside her bed. The weight of 70 years of silence hung in the air between them, broken only by the gentle rustling of aged paper as Anna's trembling hands retrieved a small leather-bound journal from beneath her pillow. "I've never shared these words with another soul," Anna whispered, her voice carrying the weight of decades of preserved memories. "Not even with Ruth or Eli." Her fingers traced the worn edges of the journal, each page holding fragments of a love story interrupted by war. Anthony leaned forward slightly, his presence both gentle and attentive. The significance of this moment wasn't lost on him. How many stories had remained untold, locked away in the hearts of those who lived through that devastating war. Anna's trust in sharing this piece of herself stirred something profound within him. "Daniel wrote to me every week from Europe," Anna continued, opening the journal to a marked page. "Until the letters stopped coming. This poem, I wrote it the day I received word of his passing." Her voice wavered but held steady, like a candle flame in a gentle breeze. The words flowed from her lips, each verse painting vivid images of a young Amish woman waiting by the mailbox, of letters crossing oceans, of prayers whispered into quiet nights. The poem spoke of simple moments, shared glances across a church gathering, stolen conversations during Sunday socials, promises made beneath summer stars. But it also captured the crushing weight of loss, the way grief could hollow out a heart while somehow leaving it beating. Anthony found himself transported through her words to a different time, seeing Daniel Miller through Anna's eyes. Not as a fallen soldier, but as a young man who dared to love deeply enough to risk everything. The poem wove together themes of faith, duty, and sacrifice, challenging the boundaries between the Amish world and the war that had reached across oceans to touch it. As Anna's voice faded on the final verse, silence filled the room once more. But this silence felt different, lighter somehow, as if the sharing of her words had lifted a burden she'd carried alone for too long. Tears traced silent paths down her weathered cheeks, yet a subtle smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Daniel always said that stories were meant to be shared," Anna said softly, closing the journal. "That they lose their power when we keep them locked away." She looked at Anthony with clear eyes that held both wisdom and question. "Perhaps that's why you're here, Mr. Hopkins, to help me unlock this story before it's too late." The responsibility of her trust settled over Anthony like a mantle. How could he capture the depth of emotion contained in those carefully preserved pages? How could he translate 70 years of faithful love into images that would resonate with a modern audience while honoring the simplicity and dignity of Anna's world? Anna reached out and placed her hand over his, her touch as light as a butterfly's wing. "There's more," she said. "So many more poems, more memories. Would you like to hear them?" The question hung between them, an offering of trust that transcended their different worlds. In that moment, Anthony understood that he wasn't just being offered material for his film. He was being invited to become a keeper of memories, a witness to a love story that had shaped not just Anna's life, but the lives of everyone around her. Through her poetry, Daniel Miller's spirit had remained alive, touching hearts across generations, and now it would reach even further through the power of storytelling. The afternoon light continued to fade, but neither Anthony nor Anna noticed, as she turned to another page in her journal, ready to share another piece of her heart's history. In the quiet of that room, past and present merged through the timeless power of words spoken aloud at last. The weight of Anna's words lingered in the farmhouse long after her voice had fallen silent. Her poem about Daniel Miller, untouched for 7 decades, had carved new channels of understanding between the unlikely gathering of souls in the Zook family's living room. Anthony Hopkins sat motionless, his weathered hands still gripping the arms of his chair, while the raw emotion of Anna's verse continued to reverberate through his consciousness. Through the window, the afternoon light cast long shadows across the wooden floor, marking time's passage in silent strokes. Ruth Zook moved quietly through the room, her practiced steps barely disturbing the profound stillness that had settled over them all. Her eyes, usually sharp with judgment, now held a newfound softness as she regarded Anthony, the English stranger who had somehow coaxed forth the words her aunt had held close for so many years. Eli Zook stood near the doorway, his young face marked by an understanding far beyond his years. He had always sensed there was more to his great-aunt's story, but the depth of her loss, so eloquently captured in her poetry, had struck him with unexpected force. How many other stories lay buried beneath the surface of his community's quiet existence? The poem had done more than simply break Anna's silence about Daniel Miller. It had created an invisible thread, connecting each person in the room to her long-ago love story. Anthony found himself wondering about the young soldier, who had captured Anna's heart so completely that 7 decades couldn't dim the brightness of her memory. What would Daniel think of how his story had finally emerged, carried on the voice of the woman who had loved him so faithfully? Ruth's initial resistance to Anthony's presence began to dissolve as she witnessed the gentle way he received Anna's words. The English world, with its cameras and constant motion, had always seemed a threat to their way of life. Yet here was a man who understood the value of silence, who recognized the sacred nature of a story held close to the heart for so many years. Could she have been wrong about his intentions? For Anna, the sharing of her poem had unleashed something, both terrifying and liberating. The words she had written in secret during countless nights when sleep eluded her now existed in the world beyond her private thoughts. Her gaze moved between the faces around her, searching for signs of judgment, but finding only compassion. How strange that it took an outsider, someone so far removed from her world, to help her voice what she had carried alone for so long. Eli found himself drawn to Anthony's reaction, studying the filmmaker's face as he processed Anna's story. The young man had always harbored a secret fascination with storytelling, particularly the way the English captured tales through their lenses and screens. Now he understood that some stories carried more power in their telling than any image could capture. What would it mean to be a keeper of such stories? The afternoon light continued to shift, but none of them moved to break the spell that Anna's words had cast. Each person in the room felt the weight of what had been shared, not just a poem but a piece of history that had shaped their community in ways they were only now beginning to understand. Anthony's documentary project, which had seemed so straightforward, at first had evolved into something far more profound. Ruth quietly prepared tea, her movements a meditation on all that had transpired. The familiar ritual helped her process the changes taking place within their household. As she distributed the steaming cups, she noticed how naturally Anthony had become part of their circle. When had the English stranger become something more? Perhaps there was wisdom in opening their doors to someone who could help preserve these precious memories. The poem had done more than reveal Anna's past. It had created new possibilities for their future. How would they all be changed by this sharing of long-held secrets? What other stories might emerge now that Anna had broken her silence? The questions hung in the air like the steam rising from their teacups, waiting to be answered in their own time. Anthony Hopkins sat at the weathered oak desk in his temporary room at the Zook farmhouse, his fingers hovering over his laptop keyboard as Anna's words echoed in his mind. The simple yet profound poetry she had shared had stirred something deep within him, a recognition that his original screenplay about the Amish community had barely scratched the surface of their rich emotional landscape. Through the window, he could hear Ruth Zook calling to Eli about the evening chores, their voices carrying across the autumn air. The familiar sounds of their daily routine had become a comfort to him, so different from the cacophony of Los Angeles that had previously fueled his writing. Here, in this place of quiet reflection, Anthony found himself deleting entire sections of his script with newfound clarity. The character he had originally created, a one-dimensional Amish woman who served merely as a plot device, now seemed hollow compared to the depth he had witnessed in Anna. Her story of love, loss, and unwavering faith deserved more than the superficial treatment he had initially planned. How could he have thought he understood this world before meeting her? Eli's soft knock at the door interrupted Anthony's thoughts. The young man entered, carrying a steaming mug of coffee. a small modern concession that Ruth had begun allowing for their English guest. "Still working on the new pages?" Eli asked, his curiosity about the filmmaking process barely concealed beneath his traditional demeanor. Anthony accepted the coffee with gratitude, noting how Eli's eyes lingered on the laptop screen. The young man's secret fascination with storytelling had become apparent over their weeks together, revealing itself in subtle questions and thoughtful observations about narrative structure. "Your Aunt Anna's poetry changed everything," Anthony admitted, gesturing to the pages of notes scattered across the desk. "I've been thinking about how to honor her story while respecting your community's privacy." In the kitchen below, they could hear Ruth and Anna preparing the evening meal, their gentle conversation drifting upward. The dynamics between the women had shifted since Anna had shared her poems, as if the act of revealing her past had somehow strengthened the bonds between all of them. Ruth's initial suspicion of Anthony had mellowed into a cautious acceptance, particularly after seeing how his interest in Anna's story had brought a new light to her aunt's eyes. Anthony found himself weaving these complex relationships into his revised screenplay. The character inspired by Anna was no longer just a vehicle for exploring Amish life. She became the heart of a story about love that transcended time and tradition. But how could he capture the essence of her poetry, the way her words bridged the gap between their two worlds? Eli pulled up a chair, his usual reserve giving way to genuine interest. "Perhaps the story isn't just about us," he suggested carefully. "Maybe it's about how different paths can lead to the same truth." His insight surprised Anthony, who had been struggling with this very concept. The sound of Ruth calling them to dinner drifted up the stairs, but Anthony quickly jotted down Eli's words. The young man's perspective, caught between respect for his heritage and curiosity about the outside world, added another layer to the narrative taking shape in Anthony's mind. How many others straddled similar boundaries, seeking to honor their traditions while acknowledging the changing world around them? As they descended to join the women, Anthony realized that his film was evolving into something far more nuanced than his original concept. Through Anna's poetry, he had discovered a universal story about faith, love, and the connections that bind people across seemingly insurmountable divides. The challenge now lay in translating these delicate truths to the screen without diminishing their power. Ruth's expression softened when they entered the kitchen, her earlier reservations about having an English filmmaker in their midst gradually giving way to a grudging appreciation for how he had drawn Anna out of her shell. The elderly woman sat at her usual place, her face animated as she discussed her memories with Ruth, who listened with newfound attention to stories she had heard countless times before. Anthony took his seat, observing the subtle interactions between family members with fresh eyes. Each gesture, each unspoken understanding, contained worlds of meaning that his previous script had failed to capture. How could he convey the depth of these relationships to an audience that might never experience such a community firsthand? The evening meal became another lesson in the power of simple moments to reveal profound truths. As Anthony listened to the quiet conversation around him, new scenes began forming in his mind, scenes that would show rather than tell, that would invite viewers to discover the beauty of this world through their own observations rather than heavy-handed exposition. Ruth Zook had always considered herself Anna's protector, a role she embraced with the same dedication she applied to tending her herb garden or preserving summer's bounty. But as she watched Anthony Hopkins spend increasing time with her sister-in-law, something stirred within her that went beyond mere protective instinct. What right did this Englisher have to Anna's story? The question burned in her mind like an unattended kettle. One crisp autumn morning, while Anthony sat on the porch transcribing his latest conversation with Anna, Ruth approached him with purposeful steps. Her normally gentle demeanor had hardened into something more resolute, her eyes carrying the weight of years spent guarding family secrets. "Mr. Hopkins," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "I need to understand what thee intends to do with Anna's story." The question hung between them like morning mist, heavy, with implication. Anthony set aside his notebook, recognizing the gravity of the moment. Through his conversations with Eli, He had learned of Ruth's deep connection to Anna, how she had stood by her sister-in-law through decades of quiet grief after Daniel's death. This wasn't merely about protecting a story. It was about preserving the sanctity of a life lived in faithful remembrance. Ruth continued, her words measured but direct. Anna's poetry, her memories of Daniel, these aren't just stories for thee to collect and sell. They're sacred to us. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her apron pocket, a poem Anna had written years ago about Daniel's last visit before shipping out to war. Anthony listened as Ruth recited the verses, hearing for the first time how Anna had captured the way Daniel's hands had trembled as he'd helped her hang laundry that final morning, how he'd stopped to watch a cardinal take flight, details so intimate they made him question his own right to bear witness to them. Tension between them shifted as Ruth shared more about the years following Daniel's death. How Anna had withdrawn into herself, speaking only through her poetry. How the community had rallied around her, respecting her choice to never marry, understanding that her heart remained with a young man buried in foreign soil. Does thee know what it means to guard someone's heart for decades? Ruth asked, her voice softening. To watch them live with both grief and grace? The question wasn't accusatory, but rather an invitation to understand the depth of responsibility she felt. Anthony thought of his own creative stirrings, how Anna's story had begun to reshape his understanding of love and loyalty. He shared with Ruth how his original script, once focused on sensational elements, had evolved into something more nuanced, more true to the quiet dignity he'd witnessed in their community. Ruth listened, her expression thoughtful as Anthony explained his vision for honoring Anna's story while protecting its essential truth. He spoke of the universal themes of faith, loss, and enduring love that transcended cultural boundaries. How perhaps sharing Anna's story might help others understand the depth of commitment possible in a world that often seemed to value temporary connections. The conversation shifted from confrontation to collaboration as Ruth began to see Anthony, not as an intruder but as someone who might help preserve Anna's legacy in a way that respected their ways. She shared insights about Anna's daily rituals, how she still set out 2 cups for morning coffee, one for herself and one for Daniel's memory. Through their exchange, both Ruth and Anthony gained a deeper appreciation for their shared goal: protecting Anna's story while allowing it to touch others' lives. Ruth's challenge had evolved into an unexpected partnership, one founded on mutual respect and understanding. As the morning light strengthened, casting long shadows across the porch, Ruth reached into her pocket once more. This time she withdrew a small leather-bound notebook, its pages yellow with age. These are some of Anna's earliest poems, she said softly. Perhaps they will help thee understand better what we're entrusting to you. The gesture represented more than just access to additional material. It was Ruth's acknowledgement that sometimes the best way to protect a story is to share it with someone who understands its value. How would Anthony honor this newfound trust? What depths of Anna's experience would these early writings reveal? Anthony Hopkins sat in the familiar warmth of Anna Zook's sitting room, his digital recorder untouched on the small wooden table between them. The afternoon light filtered through the plain curtains, casting a gentle glow on Anna's weathered face as she contemplated the decision before her. The silence stretched between them, heavy with decades of carefully guarded memories. What troubles thee about sharing the story, Anna? Anthony asked softly, noting how her fingers traced the worn edges of Daniel's letters, tucked safely in her lap. The question hung in the air, mingling with the scent of Ruth's fresh-baked bread wafting from the kitchen. Anna's eyes, still sharp despite her advanced years, met Anthony's with unexpected clarity. In our way, pride is a sin, Anthony. To put my name to these words, to claim this story as mine alone. It doesn't sit right with my heart. She paused, her gaze drifting to the window where a cardinal perched momentarily before taking flight. But perhaps the story itself isn't mine to keep. From his position by the doorway, Eli Zook cleared his throat softly. Great Aunt Anna, I've been thinking about what thee said about Daniel's letters, how his words were meant to reach beyond just one heart. The young man's insight, born from his secret appreciation of modern storytelling, carried a weight that made both Anthony and Anna turn toward him. Ruth appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Her initial hostility toward Anthony had softened over the weeks, transformed by witnessing the gentle respect with which he handled Anna's memories. "The English world is different from ours," she offered, surprising everyone with her contribution. "But truth speaks in any language." Anthony leaned forward, careful to keep his voice measured despite the hope rising in his chest. "What if we found a way to honor both your faith and Daniel's memory? The story could be told without attribution, focusing on the message rather than the messenger." Anna's fingers stilled on the letters. The proposition seemed to unlock something in her expression, as if a door long closed had finally found its key. "Daniel always said that love was like light. It belongs to no one person but touches all it reaches." She looked down at the carefully preserved papers in her lap, then back at Anthony. "Perhaps that's what this story should be. Light, not ownership." The decision crystallized in the room's quiet atmosphere, witnessed by the unlikely assembly of souls brought together by a love story that had waited decades to be told. Ruth moved closer to her aunt-in-law, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. The gesture spoke volumes about her own journey from skepticism to understanding. Eli's face brightened with barely contained excitement. "The world needs more stories that speak to the heart's truth," he said, then quickly added, "So the English say," to maintain his careful balance between two worlds. Anthony reached for his recorder but stopped short of activating it. "Before we begin, Anna, I want you to know something. This isn't just about preserving history or creating entertainment. It's about honoring a love that survived war, crossed cultural boundaries, and never lost its power to inspire." Anna nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Daniel would have understood this moment. He always said that some stories are like stars. They belong to the night sky, not to the one who first spotted their light. She smoothed her apron with trembling hands. "I'm ready now, Anthony. Let us give Daniel's words wings." The afternoon unfolded into evening as Anna began to speak, her voice growing stronger with each shared memory. The story flowed naturally now, unburdened by concerns of attribution or recognition. It became something larger than any single person in the room, a testament to love's endurance, faith's strength, and the unexpected ways in which different worlds could touch and transform each other. Ruth quietly served tea as the narrative unfolded, her presence a silent blessing on the proceedings. Eli occasionally contributed context about Amish customs for Anthony's benefit, his role as cultural bridge never more apparent or valuable. And through it all, Anthony listened, recorded, and understood that he had become part of something far more significant than a simple documentation project. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the wooden floor, Anna held up one of Daniel's letters, its pages golden in the fading light. "These words have lived in my heart for so long," she said softly. "Perhaps now is their time to live in other hearts as well." Anthony Hopkins sat in the familiar warmth of Anna Zook's sitting room, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the hand-stitched quilt draped over her lap. The past months had transformed their initial awkward encounters into something profound, a connection that transcended their vastly different worlds. As he watched Anna's weathered hands smooth the fabric of her dress, he understood that the responsibility she had bestowed upon him carried the weight of 8 decades of cherished memories. "The world has changed so much since Daniel," Anna mused, her voice carrying the gentle lilt that had become as familiar to Anthony as his own mother's. "But love, true love, remains the same." Her eyes, still bright despite her years, met Anthony's with an intensity that made him shift in his seat. Eli Zook, who had been quietly observing from his post near the window, moved closer to his great-aunt. His presence had become instrumental in these meetings, bridging the gap between Anthony's modern sensibilities and the traditional ways of their community. "Aunt Anna's trust in thee is not given lightly," he remarked, his words carrying the weight of generations of Amish wisdom. Ruth Zook entered the room carrying a tray of fresh-baked bread and tea. her initial suspicion of Anthony having mellowed into a cautious acceptance. She had witnessed the gradual transformation in Anna over the past months, a rekindling of spirit that coincided with Anthony's regular visits and their shared exploration of Daniel's memory through Anna's poetry. "How will you tell it?" Ruth asked, her practical nature seeking concrete assurances. "Our ways are not for show or entertainment." The question hung in the air, heavy with the responsibility of preserving not just Anna's story, but the dignity of their entire community. Anthony leaned forward, choosing his words carefully. "Daniel's letters speak of a love that transcends time and culture," he began, watching as Anna's eyes softened at the mention of her lost love. "Your poetry, Anna, captures something universal, something that speaks to the heart regardless of one's background or beliefs." The promise Anthony was about to make would shape not only his approach to sharing Anna's story, but also his understanding of what it meant to be entrusted with another's most precious memories. How could he ensure that the world would see beyond the surface details of Amish life to the profound truth at the heart of Anna's journey? Eli's quiet voice broke through Anthony's contemplation. "In our way, a promise is binding before God and man." His words carried both warning and wisdom, reminding Anthony of the sacred trust being placed in his hands. "I promise to honor not just the facts of your story, Anna, but its spirit," Anthony declared, his voice steady despite the emotion tightening his throat. "Your love for Daniel, your faith, your community, these will be portrayed with the reverence they deserve." Anna's face softened into a smile that reminded Anthony of why he had been drawn to her story in the first place. There was something timeless in her expression, something that spoke of both loss and enduring hope. She reached for a small wooden box beside her chair, her movements deliberate and purposeful. "These are Daniel's last letters," she said, extending the box toward Anthony. "I've kept them close for nearly 80 years. They tell our story better than I ever could." The simple act of sharing these precious documents represented more than just trust. It was an acknowledgement that some stories needed to be preserved for future generations. Ruth watched the exchange with glistening eyes, her protective instincts warring with the recognition that Anna's story deserved to be shared. What impact would these private memories have when revealed to the world? How would others interpret the depth of faith and commitment that had sustained Anna through decades of waiting? The room fell into a contemplative silence, broken only by the distant sound of a horse and buggy passing on the road outside. Anthony held the box of letters with the reverence of one handling sacred texts, understanding that within these pages lay not just a love story, but a testament to the enduring power of faith, community, and unconditional love. "Daniel once wrote that love is like a lantern in the dark," Anna recalled, her voice taking on the cadence of memory. "It guides us home even when the path seems lost." How many times had she returned to those words during the long years without him? How had they sustained her faith when the world around her changed beyond recognition? The promise Anthony made that afternoon would guide every word he wrote, every scene he crafted. It would remind him that some stories are not meant to be merely told, but rather preserved as beacons of hope for those still searching for their own path home. The morning dew clung heavily to the grass as Anthony Hopkins stood at the edge of the Zook property, his rental car packed and ready for departure. The past weeks had transformed him in ways he never expected when he first arrived seeking merely another screenplay to direct. Instead, he had discovered something far more precious, a story that demanded to be told with reverence rather than commercial appeal. Through the early morning mist, Anthony watched Eli Zook approach from the main house, his steady gait reflecting the quiet strength that had guided their unlikely friendship. The young Amish man carried a small package wrapped in brown paper, holding it with the careful attention one might give to a rare treasure. "Anna wanted you to have this," Eli said, extending the package. "She finished binding it last night." Inside was a leather-bound collection of Anna's poems about Daniel Miller, each page carefully transcribed in her delicate handwriting. The gesture struck Anthony deeply. This wasn't just permission to tell her story, it was an entrusting of her heart's deepest chambers. Ruth Zook emerged from the house next, her traditional dress catching the morning light. The transformation in their relationship from initial suspicion to mutual respect had been gradual but profound. She carried a basket of fresh-baked bread and preserves, a traditional parting gift that spoke volumes about her acceptance of the Englisher who had become part of their world. "You'll remember your promise?" Ruth asked, though her tone carried no doubt. The question instead served as a gentle reminder of the sacred trust they now shared. Anthony nodded, recalling his vow to protect the essence of Anna's story, to ensure that Daniel's memory and the depth of their love would be honored rather than exploited. Anna herself had said her goodbyes the night before, her frail health making early mornings difficult. Their final conversation had stretched long into the evening, her voice growing stronger as she shared more details about Daniel. The way he laughed, how he would recite poetry while they worked in the fields, the letters he wrote from basics, training that she could still quote from memory. As Anthony prepared to leave, Eli stepped forward with an unexpected question. "Will you let me know when the film is complete?" His eyes held a hint of the secret passion for storytelling they had discovered they shared. "I may not be able to see it, but I would like to know when Anna's story reaches others." The request highlighted the delicate balance Anthony now needed to maintain, honoring both the Amish way of life and the universal truth of the love story he had discovered. He had arrived seeking drama, but found instead a quiet power in the endurance of Anna's devotion to Daniel, a love that had shaped not just her life, but the entire community around her. The sun was rising properly now, casting long shadows across the farmland. Ruth had retreated to the porch, but Eli remained, watching as Anthony opened his car door. "You've learned our ways well," Eli observed, "but perhaps we have learned something from you too, about how stories can bridge different worlds." Anthony paused before entering his vehicle, taking in the scene one final time. The weathered farmhouse, the well-tended fields, the quiet dignity that permeated everything. He had come seeking a story about the Amish world, but would leave with a universal tale of love, loss, and the power of memory to shape lives across generations. As he drove away, watching the Zook farm recede in his rearview mirror, Anthony realized that his promise to honor Anna's story had become more than a professional commitment. It was now a personal mission to capture the essence of what he had witnessed, not just a love story frozen in time, but a living testament to how love continues to influence and shape lives long after loss. The manuscript of poems rested on the passenger seat beside him, a tangible reminder of the trust placed in his hands. Each mile that carried him back toward his familiar world reinforced his determination to create something that would honor not just Anna and Daniel's story, but the entire community that had preserved and been shaped by their love. What began as a search for his next film project had evolved into something far more meaningful. Anthony now carried with him not just a story to tell, but a deeper understanding of how love, memory, and community intertwine to create something both timeless and perpetually relevant. The challenge ahead was clear: how to translate this quiet power into a form that would touch others while remaining true to its essential nature. In the solitude of his Manhattan apartment, Anthony Hopkins sat before his computer, fingers hovering over the keyboard as Anna Zook's poetry manuscripts lay scattered across his desk. The challenge before him seemed almost insurmountable. How could he possibly capture the depth of Anna's story, her lost love Daniel Miller, and the profound impact of the Amish community in a way that would honor their truth? The first draft emerged slowly, with Anthony carefully weaving together the threads of Anna's poetry with the historical backdrop of World War II. He found himself frequently returning to his conversations with Eli Zook, remembering the young man's unexpected insight into storytelling and his quiet wisdom about bridging two worlds. Those late-night discussions on the Zook's porch had revealed more than just plot points. They had unveiled the heart of what this story needed to be. Ruth Zook's initial skepticism of his presence in their community now served as a powerful element in his screenplay. Anthony crafted scenes that reflected the delicate balance between tradition and change, protection and growth, using Ruth's character arc as a mirror for the broader themes of acceptance and understanding. Her transformation from wary guardian to reluctant ally became a cornerstone of the narrative's emotional journey. As weeks turned into months, Anthony discovered that Daniel Miller's absence had become a presence in itself. Through Anna's poetry, Daniel emerged as more than just a lost love. He became a symbol of sacrifice, hope, and the enduring power of memory. Anthony found himself writing late into the night, driven by the responsibility to honor this man he had never met, but whose story had become intertwined with his own. The screenplay took shape around Anna's poems, each verse carefully placed to reveal deeper layers of meaning. Anthony remembered the way Anna's eyes would light up when she shared her memories, how her hands would tremble slightly as she turned the pages of her worn notebook. He incorporated these subtle details, understanding that the true story lay, not just in the words but in the spaces between them. Eli's secret passion for modern storytelling proved invaluable during the writing process. Through their continued correspondence, letters exchanged through the local post office, Eli provided crucial feedback about how the Amish elements of the story were being portrayed. His unique perspective, straddling both the modern and traditional worlds, helped Anthony maintain authenticity while making the story accessible to a broader audience. The character of Anna in the screenplay evolved beyond just her poetry. Anthony captured her quiet strength, the way she had maintained her faith and identity despite profound loss. He showed how her decision to remain unmarried after Daniel's death wasn't just about loyalty to a memory, but about staying true to her own heart's truth. Through careful character development, he illustrated how Anna's choice had shaped not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. Ruth's role as Anna's caretaker became a testament to the Amish commitment to family and community. Anthony crafted scenes that showed the daily rhythms of their life together, the morning prayers, the shared meals, the gentle way Ruth would help Anna with her daily tasks. These moments, though simple, carried the weight of years of shared history and understanding. As the final draft took shape, Anthony realized that the story had become more than just a screenplay about an Amish poet and her lost love. It had evolved into a meditation on faith, community, and the unexpected ways lives intersect and influence each other. The narrative explored how tradition and progress could coexist, how loss could lead to unexpected connections, and how love could transcend time and cultural boundaries. The writing process itself became a kind of spiritual journey for Anthony. Each day spent crafting the screenplay deepened his understanding of the lessons he had learned during his time with the Zook family. The simple wisdom of their way of life, their dedication to community, and their ability to find joy in life's ordinary moments had transformed his perspective on what truly mattered. What would audiences make of this unconventional love story? How would they respond to a narrative that challenged preconceptions about both the Amish world and the nature of love itself? These questions drove Anthony to refine and polish every scene, every line of dialogue, until the screenplay felt true to both Anna's story and the larger truths it represented. An unseasonably warm October breeze rustled through the cornfields as Eli Zook made his way down the familiar dirt path to his Aunt Ruth's farmhouse. In his hand, he clutched an envelope that had arrived earlier that morning at the general store, its crisp white paper and professional letterhead standing in stark contrast to the earthen simplicity surrounding him. The return address bore the distinctive Hollywood studio logo that had become familiar to him over the past months of corresponding with Anthony Hopkins. Inside the farmhouse, Anna Zook sat in her favorite rocking chair by the window, her weathered hands moving methodically across a quilt square as Ruth prepared the evening meal. The familiar rhythm of their daily routine had shifted subtly since Anthony's departure 3 months ago, with Anna spending more time lost in thought, occasionally sharing fragments of memories that had remained unspoken for decades. "There's something here from Anthony," Eli announced, his voice carrying a hint of excitement he tried to temper out of respect for the plain way. Ruth wiped her hands on her apron and moved closer, her initial wariness of anything connected to the English world having softened since Anthony's time with them. Anna's eyes brightened at the mention of Anthony's name. The unexpected friendship that had developed between the elderly Amish woman and the Hollywood screenwriter had surprised everyone, perhaps most of all, Anna herself. Through their conversations about Daniel Miller and the poetry that had sustained her through decades of grief, she had found herself sharing parts of her heart that had remained closed since that fateful telegram in 1944. The letter inside revealed Anthony's careful consideration of their beliefs and customs. He had arranged for a private screening of the completed film at a small theater in Lancaster, away from the usual tourist areas. The showing would be exclusively for the Zook family and any community members they wished to include, with transportation provided in a manner respectful of their ways. Ruth's hands trembled slightly as she read the invitation. The world Anthony represented had long been one she viewed with caution, if not outright suspicion. Yet his genuine respect for their ways and the gentle manner in which he had drawn out Anna's story had gradually worn down her defenses. "What do you think, Anna?" she asked, her voice soft with concern for her aunt's feelings. Anna's response surprised them all. "Daniel's story deserves to be heard," she said simply, her clear eyes meeting Ruth's worried gaze. "Not for pride or worldly recognition, but as testament to how love endures beyond all earthly bounds." Eli found himself caught between two worlds, the one he had been born into and the one he secretly yearned to understand better. Anthony's film represented a bridge between these realms, much as Eli himself had served as a bridge during the screenwriter's time with them. The prospect of seeing how Anthony had translated Anna's deeply personal story to the screen both thrilled and terrified him. The decision to attend the screening would require careful navigation of community expectations and their own beliefs about separation from the English world. Bishop Stoltzfus would need to be consulted and arrangements would have to be made that honored both their traditions and Anthony's generous offer. As the family discussed the logistics, Anna's thoughts drifted to the poems carefully preserved in her cedar chest upstairs, the ones she had shared with Anthony during those long summer afternoons. How would he have captured the essence of her love for Daniel? Would others understand the depth of faith that had carried her through decades of waiting for a reunion that would come only in God's time? The invitation represented more than just a film screening. It symbolized the unexpected ways in which lives could intertwine across seemingly insurmountable divides of culture, time, and belief. Anthony had entered their world as a stranger seeking a story, but his genuine respect and understanding had transformed him into something more. A keeper of sacred memories, a bridge between past and present. Ruth watched as Anna's fingers resumed their steady movement across the quilt square, noting how her aunt's expression had softened into one of peaceful contemplation. Perhaps this invitation was part of God's greater plan, a way to ensure that Daniel's story, and the enduring power of faith and love it represented, would touch hearts beyond their small community. The sun was setting behind the cornfields as Eli prepared to return home, the invitation safely tucked away in Anna's Bible for safekeeping. The coming weeks would bring many discussions and decisions, but for now, the possibility of sharing their story with the world hung in the air like a prayer, gentle, hopeful, and filled with purpose. The early morning mist clung to the Lancaster county farmland as three figures emerged from the Zook homestead. Anthony Hopkins watched from his rental car as Eli helped Anna and Ruth into their traditional black buggy, the sound of hooves on gravel breaking the dawn silence. This unconventional caravan, an English car following an Amish buggy, would mark the beginning of their journey to Philadelphia, a path bridging not just physical distance but generations of tradition and change. The arrangement had taken careful planning. After much discussion with the bishop, permission had been granted for the Zooks to travel by motor vehicle once they reached the main highway, though they insisted on beginning their journey in the traditional manner. Anthony understood this. Compromise represented more than mere logistics. It symbolized the delicate balance between honoring their ways and embracing the necessity of the modern world. As they approached the agreed-upon meeting point, a small parking lot near the highway, Anthony observed Ruth's rigid posture softening slightly. The past months had transformed their relationship from one of suspicion to cautious acceptance. She helped Anna from the buggy with practiced care, while Eli arranged for a neighbor to take the horse and buggy back to the farm. The transition from their world to his felt momentous, like crossing an invisible boundary. During the drive to Philadelphia, Anna sat in the back seat, her aged hands folded carefully over a leather-bound journal, her collection of poems about Daniel. She had insisted on bringing it, though Anthony knew she had long since memorized every word. The city skyline gradually materialized through the morning haze, and Anthony noticed Eli's barely contained excitement. Despite his careful adherence to his community's ways, Eli's fascination with the modern world occasionally sparked in his eyes. Ruth maintained her composure, but her fingers twisted the fabric of her dress as the buildings grew taller and the traffic denser. How strange this world must appear through her eyes. The endless stream of cars, the glass and steel monuments to progress, the hurried pace of city life. Yet she had chosen to come, to support Anna in this unexpected chapter of her life. The screening room was housed in a modest building, intentionally selected to be less overwhelming than the grand theaters downtown. As they walked through the lobby, Anthony noticed how the other patrons tried not to stare at the small Amish group, their plain dress a stark contrast to the contemporary surroundings. But Anna moved with quiet dignity, as if she belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. Inside the private screening room, the small group settled into their seats. Anthony had arranged everything meticulously, the lighting, the sound level, even the temperature, to ensure Anna's comfort. As the lights dimmed, he heard Ruth's sharp intake of breath. How many decades had it been since she had sat in a darkened room like this, waiting for images to appear on a screen? The project had evolved far beyond its original scope. What began as a simple documentary about Amish life had transformed into something more profound. A love story that spanned decades, a testament to the power of memory and the unexpected ways hearts could connect across time and culture. Anthony had woven Anna's poetry throughout the narrative, her words about Daniel serving as a bridge between past and present, between her world and his. As the first images appeared on the screen, Anthony felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had become more than just a filmmaker. He was now the keeper of Anna's story, the translator of her heart's journey. The soft gasp from Anna's direction suggested she recognized the opening lines, her own words about the day she first met Daniel, now given voice and vision in a way she had never imagined. The room fell into complete silence as the story began to unfold. Through the darkness, Anthony could sense the tension in Ruth's posture gradually easing, while Eli leaned forward slightly, absorbed in the technical aspects of filmmaking he had so often questioned Anthony about. But it was Anna's response he most anxiously awaited. How would she receive this modern interpretation of her most precious memories? The documentary represented more than just a professional achievement for Anthony. It had become a testament to the unexpected connections that could form between people from vastly different worlds, united by the universal language of love and loss. As the story of Anna and Daniel unfolded on screen, Anthony realized that sometimes the most powerful stories were not those we sought out, but those that found us when we least expected them. The Grand Theater in downtown Philadelphia stood as an ornate testament to cinema's golden age, its marquee now displaying private screening The Poet's Heart in bold letters. Anthony Hopkins paced nervously in the lobby, his usual directorial confidence wavering as he watched the small group of Amish guests arrive in their traditional dress, creating a striking contrast against the Art Deco interior. Anna Zook entered, on Eli's arm, her weathered face brightening at the gilded surroundings. Ruth followed close behind, her protective stance softening as she observed Anna's evident delight. The elderly woman's eyes traced the intricate ceiling patterns, reminding Anthony of how she'd once described Daniel's letters, full of hidden beauty waiting to be discovered. As the small audience settled into their seats, Anthony found himself more concerned with Anna's reaction than any film critic's review. The lights dimmed, and the screen flickered to life. The opening scene showed rolling Pennsylvania farmland, mirroring the view from Anna's window where she'd first shared her story with him. The actress portraying young Anna captured her essence with remarkable precision, from the slight tilt of her head when deep in thought to the way her hands moved while reciting poetry. Eli leaned forward in his seat, clearly captivated by the technical aspects of filmmaking. while Ruth's rigid posture gradually relaxed as the story unfolded. But it was Anna's response that held Anthony's attention. Her hand trembled slightly as she watched her younger self fall in love with Daniel, their courtship playing out exactly as she'd described during those long afternoon conversations. The war scenes were handled with deliberate restraint, focusing instead on the letters exchanged between Anna and Daniel. Anthony had insisted on using Anna's actual poems, their raw emotion carrying more weight than any manufactured dialogue could achieve. When Daniel's final letter arrived on screen, Anthony heard a soft catch in Anna's breath. The film's pivotal moment approached, the scene where young Anna received news of Daniel's fate. Anthony had agonized over this sequence, wanting to honor both the profound loss and the enduring love that had shaped Anna's life. The actress delivered the poem Anna had written that day, the words flowing as naturally as they had when Anna first recited them in her sitting room. Ruth reached for Anna's hand in the darkness, their shared understanding of grief transcending their initial differences. Eli's usual enthusiasm for film technique gave way to quiet reflection, perhaps seeing his great-aunt in a new light. The story continued, showing Anna's choice to honor Daniel's memory through her poetry, while embracing her faith and community. As the final scene faded to black, Anthony held his breath. The light slowly rose, revealing tears on Anna's cheeks, but she was smiling. The expression reminded him of something she'd said during their first meeting. Some stories need to be told not just with words, but with heart. The small audience sat in respectful silence as the credits rolled, each name representing someone who had helped bring Anna's story to the screen. When Anna's name appeared as both subject and poet, Eli squeezed her shoulder gently. The gesture spoke volumes about the family's journey from skepticism to acceptance of this unusual project. Ruth turned to Anthony, her earlier reservations replaced by quiet gratitude. She understood now what he had seen from the beginning, that some stories transcend cultural boundaries, speaking to the universal human experience of love, loss, and resilience. The film had managed to capture not just Anna's story, but the essence of her spirit. Anna finally broke the silence, her voice carrying the same strength that had first drawn Anthony to her story. "You've given Daniel's memory wings," she said simply, reaching for Anthony's hand. The comment touched something deeper than professional pride. It validated the countless hours spent ensuring every detail honored both her love story and her faith. The small group remained seated as other viewers filed out, each processing the experience in their own way. Eli's fascination with storytelling had found new purpose, while Ruth's protective instincts had transformed into pride for her sister-in-law's legacy. But it was the look of peaceful contentment on Anna's face that told Anthony he had succeeded in his most important goal, allowing her to share her heart's truth with the world while remaining true to herself. What began as a film project had evolved into something far more meaningful. A bridge between worlds, a celebration of enduring love, and a testament to the power of stories to connect hearts across time and tradition. As they finally rose to leave the theater, Anthony realized that in telling Anna's story, he had discovered something profound about the nature of love itself, how it continues to shape lives long after the last page is turned or the final scene fades. The screening room fell into complete darkness as the final scene faded to black. In that suspended moment between the story's end and whatever came next, Anthony Hopkins held his breath, acutely aware of Anna Zook's presence beside him. The soft rustle of her dress against the chair seemed to echo in the hushed space. White text began to materialize on the dark screen, appearing one letter at a time. This film is dedicated to those whose stories remain untold, whose love endures beyond words, and whose poetry speaks across generations. The simplicity of the dedication carried the weight of Anna's entire life story, without revealing her identity to the world, exactly as she had requested. Anthony felt Anna's hand trembling slightly as it found his in the darkness. Through their months of collaboration, he had learned to read the subtle language of her emotions, and this touch spoke volumes. It wasn't just gratitude he felt from her, but a profound sense of completion, as if Daniel Miller's memory had finally found its proper resting place in the world. Eli Zook, seated on Anna's other side, leaned forward with an intensity that revealed his deep investment in this moment. His usual careful balance between Amish propriety and his secret passion for storytelling had momentarily slipped, replaced by raw emotion. He understood better than most the significance of what they had accomplished, bringing his great-aunt's story to light while preserving the essential privacy of their community. Ruth Zook sat rigidly in her chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The journey from her initial suspicion of Anthony to this moment had been long and complex. The dedication's careful wording seemed to ease something in her posture, a silent acknowledgement that they had honored both truth and tradition. As the credits began to roll, Anthony reflected on how this project had evolved from a simple adaptation into something far more profound. The dedication card represented more than just an artistic choice. It embodied the delicate trust that had developed between himself and the Zook family. How many other stories lay hidden in similar communities, waiting for the right moment and the right approach to be shared? The soft murmur of conversation began to fill the room as other viewers responded to the film's ending. Yet in their small cluster of seats, Anthony and the Zooks maintained their contemplative silence. Words seemed inadequate to express the complexity of what they had achieved together. The dedication continued to linger in Anthony's mind, its carefully chosen phrases encompassing not just Anna's story, but the universal themes of love, loss, and the power of memory that had drawn him to this project in the first place. Through the entire screening, Anna had maintained her composure, but now Anthony could sense a shift in her energy. Her grip on his hand tightened almost imperceptibly, and he wondered if she was thinking of Daniel, imagining how he might have responded to seeing their love story transformed into this new medium. The dedication served as a bridge between past and present, between the private and the public, between the written word and the visual story. Eli finally broke their silence with a quiet observation that captured the essence of what they had accomplished. It honors without exposing, reveals without betraying. His words seemed to release some of the tension that had built up during the screening, allowing them all to breathe a little easier. The dedication continued to glow on the screen, its message reaching beyond the immediate story to touch on something universal. How many viewers would recognize themselves in those carefully crafted words? How many would feel the echo of their own untold stories in this anonymous tribute? As the light slowly began to rise, Anthony observed the subtle interplay of emotions across the faces of his companions. Each had approached this project with different expectations and concerns, yet here at the end, they had found a common ground in this moment of silent recognition. The dedication served as both a conclusion and a beginning, concluding Anna's journey of sharing her story while beginning its new life in the hearts and minds of audiences. The question now hanging in the air was not whether they had made the right choice in telling this story, but rather what impact it would have on those who viewed it. Would they understand the layers of meaning beneath the simple dedication? Would they recognize the careful balance struck between revelation and respect? The late autumn wind whispered through the Lancaster County cornfields as Anthony Hopkins guided his rental car along the familiar dirt road leading to the Zook farm. The small marble memorial stone rested securely in a wooden box beside him, its weight both physical and symbolic. How many times had he made this journey over the past year? Each visit had peeled back another layer of understanding, not just of Anna's story, but of his own place in this intricate tapestry of lives. Eli Zook stood waiting at the fence post, his traditional black hat and plain clothing a stark contrast to the golden fields behind him. The young man's face broke into a warm smile as Anthony parked, their mutual respect having grown far beyond their initial cautious interactions. Without words, Eli helped Anthony lift the wooden box from the car, their movements synchronized by months of shared understanding. Ruth emerged from the farmhouse, wiping her hands on her apron. The transformation in her demeanor from their first meeting was remarkable. Gone was the suspicious glare, replaced by a gentle acceptance that had taken months to earn. She nodded toward the garden path, where Anna's favorite bench stood empty beneath the maple tree. How fitting that this final gesture would take place in the spot where Anna had first shared her poetry with Anthony. She would have appreciated the simplicity, Ruth said softly, running her fingers over the smooth surface of the memorial stone. The inscription was brief, just a date and a line from one of Anna's poems about Daniel Miller. They had all agreed that Anna would have wanted it this way, her words speaking louder than any formal dedication. Eli produced a small shovel from behind the bench, having prepared for this moment. The earth was still soft from recent rains, accepting the foundation they laid with quiet reverence. As they worked together to position the stone, Anthony recalled the countless conversations with Anna in this very spot. Her voice, though now silent, seemed to echo in every word of poetry she had entrusted to him. Ruth disappeared briefly into the house, returning with a familiar leather-bound journal, Anna's original poetry collection. "She would want you to have this," she said, pressing the worn volume into Anthony's hands. "You understood her words in a way few others did." The gesture nearly undid Anthony's careful composure. How many hours had he spent transcribing these very poems, each word a thread connecting past to present? The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention to the road where several buggies were arriving. Word had spread through the community about this final tribute, and families who had known Anna were coming to pay their respects. Each arrival carried a dish or a small token of remembrance, transforming the solemn occasion into something that felt more like a celebration of Anna's life. As the gathering grew, Eli stepped closer to Anthony, speaking low enough for only him to hear. "You've given us something precious," he said, gesturing to the stone and the assembled community. "Not just the memorial, but a way to remember both Anna and Daniel that honors our ways while speaking to the English world." Anthony watched as children played near the garden's edge while their parents shared memories of Anna. The barrier between his world and theirs seemed to dissolve in these moments of shared humanity. Ruth organized the food with quiet efficiency, her initial resistance to Anthony's presence now transformed into a kind of maternal inclusion. The leather journal in Anthony's hands held more than just Anna's poetry. It contained the essence of a love story that had waited decades to be told. Daniel Miller's presence, though long departed, had shaped not only Anna's life, but had now touched all of theirs through her words. The simple memorial stone stood as a bridge between worlds, much like Anthony himself had become. As the afternoon light began to fade, Anthony found himself reluctant to leave. Each previous departure had been cushioned by the knowledge of future visits, but this one felt different. Yet looking at the gathered faces, Eli's quiet strength, Ruth's hard-won acceptance, and the community's embrace of Anna's legacy, he understood that some connections transcend regular contact. What began as a simple quest to tell an untold story had evolved into something far more profound. The memorial stone would remain here in Anna's garden, but her words through Anthony's work would travel far beyond these fields. How many others might find pieces of their own stories in the verses of an Amish woman who dared to love across boundaries of time and culture? The morning dew still clung to the grass as Anna Zook made her way through the garden, her weathered hands trailing along the familiar plants she had tended for decades. At 93, her steps were slower now, but her mind remained sharp as the morning air. Ruth watched from the kitchen window, her protective instincts never quite dormant when it came to her aunt by marriage. Something caught Anna's eye near the old oak tree, a spot where she and Daniel had carved their initials so many years ago. There, nestled among the wildflowers she'd planted in her youth, stood a simple stone marker. Her heart quickened as she drew closer, recognizing the careful craftsmanship that could only have come from Anthony Hopkins. The stone bore no elaborate inscription, no grandiose declaration. Instead, it carried only a few lines from one of her poems about Daniel, the ones Anthony had so carefully preserved. The words, etched in clean, precise letters, spoke of love that transcended time and faith that endured beyond death. Below, the verse was a simple addition. In memory of Daniel Miller and the love that changed two worlds, Eli appeared beside his great-aunt, having noticed her extended pause by the tree. "It was Anthony's way of honoring both you and Daniel," he explained softly. He wanted to ensure your story would remain here, where it began. Anna's fingers traced the letters, feeling the depth of understanding in this gesture. How had this Englisher, this man from a world so different from her own, managed to capture the essence of her heart's journey? The stone represented more than just a memorial. It was a bridge between her Amish world and the outside one she had never fully belonged to after Daniel's death. Ruth joined them, her initial reservations about Anthony's presence in their lives having mellowed into appreciation. He understood what many of us couldn't see, she admitted, placing a gentle hand on Anna's shoulder. That some loves are meant to change us, even if they don't unfold as we expect. The morning light caught the stone's surface, highlighting the carefully chosen words. Anna remembered the hours spent with Anthony, sharing her poems and memories, watching as he listened with an intensity that reminded her of Daniel's own way of making her feel truly heard. Through Anthony's questions and genuine interest, she had found herself revisiting moments she'd tucked away, allowing them to breathe in the open air once more. Eli shared how Anthony had sought permission from the community elders to place the stone, showing respect for their ways while honoring Anna's story. The young man's own journey of bridging two worlds had found reflection in Anthony's approach, careful, thoughtful, and deeply respectful of both traditions. The stone's presence stirred something in Anna that she hadn't expected, not grief or longing, but a profound sense of completion. Her love for Daniel, which had shaped her entire life, would no longer remain solely in her heart or in the pages of her poetry. It now stood as a testament to the power of love to transcend boundaries, whether they be between Amish and English, past and present, or earth and heaven. Ruth observed the change in her aunt's demeanor, a lightness that seemed to lift years from her shoulders. He gave you something we couldn't, she acknowledged. A way to share Daniel with the world without compromising who you are. The morning breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers, and Anna found herself smiling at the perfect simplicity of Anthony's gesture. He had understood that her story with Daniel wasn't just about loss or faith or the divide between two worlds. It was about the transformative power of love that continues to shape lives long after parting. As the sun climbed higher, casting dappled shadows through the oak's leaves, Anna settled onto the bench beneath the tree. Here, beside the stone that bridged her past and present, she felt a peace she hadn't known she was seeking. Anthony had given her more than just a memorial. He had given her the gift of being truly understood, of having her life's greatest love acknowledged in a way that honored both her faith and her heart's journey. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.